Let me begin by thanking the people of Iowa for playing an extraordinary role in transforming politics in America.
2020 is our chance to make America work for everyone else. That's why we're here.
President Trump is dividing us. Hate crimes have gone up under him. Racism, homophobia, misogyny, anti-Semitism.
6 months before the Iowa caucus, the Democratic candidates for president are making their case to the people of Iowa, both at the state fair and the Wingding fundraiser.
So, who fared best? According to the Cast Your Colonel poll, Vice President Joe Biden will be the next president of the United States, but the Colonel poll is less than perfect. Joining us with a little bit of insight on how the candidates fared this weekend is the chair of the Iowa Democratic Party, Troy Price. He was at the Iowa State Fair this weekend. He joins us now via Skype. Troy, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's great to be with you.
Oh, absolutely. We always like to speak to people on the ground, and really that's what we'd love to hear from you, which is you were there. You know, the Colonel poll was the Colonel poll, but you watched those soapbox speeches and you saw the enthusiasm which was the candidates received. Who do you think was doing best at the fair?
Well, obviously the frontrunners had very good weekends. You know, Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders had tremendous crowds. I actually wasn't out for all the speeches out at the Wingding or out at the soapbox, but I was up at the Wingding up in Mason City. And, you know, overall, I will tell you there's just such tremendous enthusiasm. And I think that this weekend really helped try to get Iowans down to their, help winnow the field in their mind's eye. And so, you know, we'll see how it all plays out. But I mean, I thought it was a good weekend overall for the Democratic Party. I thought it was a good weekend for the candidates.
Yeah.
So who would be the same? I saw the same reporting as what you just indicated, that Sanders and Warren both had tremendous crowds at the fair. Who's maybe a candidate that people wouldn't expect, not one of the top 3 or 4, who's being really well received in Iowa and kind of under the radar?
You know, I thought Cory Booker had a very good response at both the Wingding and the state fair here. You know, quite a few other people, though, did as well. And it's hard for me to go through the entire list. But, you know, a lot of people had good energy. I mean, even some of the crowds here were spillover crowds for candidates that are polling, you know, at 1% in the polls. And so I think there's still a lot of energy and a lot of excitement out there for candidates. And I think, you know, Iowans are still quite a few Iowans who are still kind of dating right now, trying to figure out who they're going to support in the caucuses. And it's weekends like this that help winnow that field.
Still a lot of time on the clock.
Yeah, Troy, what are some of the bigger narratives in the mainstream media, you know, of people in Washington and New York doing armchair analysis? What are they missing? What do you think, as somebody who actually is working in Iowa for the Democratic Party?
I would say, you know, this really does come down to pocketbook issues. This comes down to the bread and butter issues that, you know, impact people's bank accounts. You know, when I'm out on the road a lot, what I'm hearing a lot about is the tariffs. And I do think that the tariffs are starting to really hurt the president's standing in the state and hurt the Republican Party standing in the state. I think that healthcare obviously remains a top issue. I know that's not going to come as a surprise to you folks, but it still is one that's driving a lot of the conversation out here. And so, but it really just comes down to who's going to be having folks' back, and that's really what this conversation is all about.
Yeah.
How are Republicans in the state talking about the trade war?
Well, they're trying not to talk about it, and when they do, they have some mild criticism of the president, but then don't do anything to actually try and affect policy. You know, I think they're caught in a really hard spot. They're trying to change the conversation. They keep talking about everything else other than the trade war. But I'll tell you this, I've been out and about a lot throughout the state. I think I put 100,000 miles on my car over the last 2 years since I've had this job.
Wow.
And everywhere I go, more and more people are talking about it. And it's not just Democrats and whatnot. It is Republicans. It's independents. It's people who are upset. They feel like the president has broken his word. You know, he promised to stand up for farmers. He promised to stand up for rural communities. But, you know, I grew up in a small town. I can tell you there are businesses in my small town where I grew up that are hurting because people aren't spending as much money. They don't have as much money to spend. Farmers are going to be pulling crops out of the field this year $2 lower than what they actually put in to grow the crops. And so, there are people who are really hurting out there, and the president is turning a blind eye to it, and the Republican Party isn't doing anything about it.
Troy, you've lived in the state for a while. You've had this job for 2 years. What are the secret sauce to what's the secret sauce to actually winning the Iowa caucuses? What are the on the ground organizational things that you need to be a successful candidate in Iowa?
This is the last one of the last places, especially in a presidential race, where retail politics is what drives the conversation. This is about you can't dazzle people with BS, as one of my former bosses used to say. You have to put the time on the ground. You have to put the organizers on the ground. You have to build relationships with voters out there. They want to ask hard questions. They want to have a chance to kick the tires. That's what it takes. And so there's no secret to it. It's just a matter of how much double grease you're going to put into it. And, I think we're seeing a lot of candidates. And this weekend, all the people at the top, from Joe Biden, Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, Pete Buttigieg, Cory Booker, even people, that may not be polling in the double digits, but like Amy Klobuchar had a great response in a lot of places I went to, and Kristen Gillibrand and a lot of others are putting a lot of time on the ground here, and that's really what it takes to win.
One I wanted to ask you about specifically is Tom Steyer, who just got in fairly recently, hasn't been on any of the debate stages, and I was kind of surprised to see him pop up at 3% in a recent Iowa poll. Look, it's still only 3%, but that's a heck of a lot better than what a lot of these candidates, like Kirsten Gillibrand, who has put in tons of time on the ground, it's a lot better than a lot of folks are doing right now. What are you seeing? Does that mesh with your view of what's happening there?
Well, I do think that Tom Steyer starts with a little bit of an advantage in that, he's had organization on the ground here for a long time. Through NextGen, they organized on dozens of college campuses the last couple of election cycles. He's been through the state quite a few times. He's been up on TV for several months, maybe not always as a candidate for president, but talking about impeachment and other things. And so people have had a chance to at least hear his name, hear a little bit about him. But it's still early in this process, and we'll see how it all plays out.
He's definitely got the money to get his message out there, too.
Absolutely. Well, Troy, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate your insights.
Hey, Troy, come back and see us again. We love having you.
We're going to have you back.
Yeah, I would love to. Love to.
Next up on Rising, conservative radio host Dennis Prager explains his lawsuit against Google.
And his argument that the company must decide if it's a publisher or an open forum. My conversation with him next.